If we're talking about a theory of everything, the first question we have to establish, does God exist?
Yes.
Simple as
Yes.
that.
Well, the reality has an identity. The identity is that as which something exists. Matter of fact, when you say the word reality, you're naming an identity. It is, you're identifying something. This.
I'm smiling because your answer on this is so beautiful. It just reminds me of Moses at the burning bush. And Moses at the burning bush says, "Who shall I tell the people that you are?" Talking to God. And God says, "Tell them I am that I am."
That's right.
I am identity itself. I'm being himself.
That's exactly right. And that's what the CTMU says. It just comes up with the mathematical structure that you need to build a reality out of that. You see? So you come up with that identity and then you search it for its properties. You see, once you've built the preliminary framework, then you start deducing the properties of this identity, and you find out that those properties match those of God as described in most of the world's major religions. Buddhism, Taoism, Hinduism, Vedism. Of course, Hinduism and Vedism, they have a God. Taoism, you know, their central principle is the way, or the Tao, okay? And they don't see Tao as God.
Yep.
And then in Buddhism, of course, you've got, you know, they are trying basically to achieve sunyata, or emptiness, right? Which is, most Buddhists, a lot of Buddhists don't even understand what that's supposed to mean. But once again, there's no God there. You can kind of read God implicitly. Some Buddhists, I've talked to Buddhists who actually think that there is a God in Buddhism of a sort. But that concept of pure consciousness is what it is, okay? And if you ask them, well, whose consciousness are you talking about? They will point at themselves and say, my consciousness. In a way, they're, you know, they kind of attribute the existence of everything to themselves. But anyway, when you look at what they've all got, you come down to the same thing. Everybody has the Tao, or the way, you know, that's the way reality works, right? And everybody, you know, has sunyata, which is pure syntax, right? Pure cognition with no instantiation, no content, right? And then you've got what the Abrahamic religions call God. It's all the same thing, okay? But what are its properties? Okay, are its properties such that you can deny the existence of God, or are its properties such that God definitely has to exist? And the answer is, God exists. The properties of the central substance and central principle of reality, those properties are attributed to God, including, of course, you know, things like you have the three O's: omniscience, omnipotence, and omnipresence, but then you've also got consciousness. God has to be sentient. Yes, you can establish a personal relationship with God. We're images of God. You know what an image is? It's basically the product of a mapping. God maps himself into each human being, right? That's a very personal thing that God is doing for us, right? And I don't understand how anybody can say that it's any different. We reflect the structure of the universe. Each one of us, we're carried by it. Everything we do, we exist in a medium. What is that medium? Right? Where did it come from? What holds it together? What is the unifying coherence, the source of coherence of that medium?
Is your claim a pantheistic claim, that God is the universe, or the universe is God, and that's that? Or no? Or is God outside of the universe and created?
God is greater than, well, what is the universe?
Damned if I know.
You ever hear of the simulation hypothesis?
Yes.
Okay, well, the simulation hypothesis is basically the idea that the reality we see around us, physical reality, is simulated on some sort of an automaton or a computer. The idea is that you've got some kind of an automaton running, you've got a simulation running on it. And God, it's more panentheistic. Do you know what panentheism is? The idea is that you've got the physical universe that you see around you, but God is not confined to the physical universe.
Okay.
An ordinary pantheist assumes that God is somehow confined to the universe, that there is just what we see around us and God is in every piece of it. God is distributed over it.
Yeah.
Right? But it's a little bit more complex than that, because this part of the universe that we see around us cannot exist just by itself.
Yeah.
Okay? There are certain things that it entails. And when you go into those entailments, that's how you get to God. That's how you get to the identity of reality. Okay, and now to get back to the reality of self-simulation, or at least that's what I call it, self-simulation. But to get back to the simulation hypothesis, that we're living in the display of that simulation. In addition to the display, there is also a processing aspect, okay? And God, it captures both of those things. He captures both the display and the processor.
What do you mean? I hate to put it in the...
Well, I mean, okay, here's the display. You realize the display contains states.
Yep.
Okay, you see things, the objects contain states. States are static.
Yep.
That's why they're called states. Yeah. Okay, static. How do they change? Well, they have to be processed. Something has to process.
Yeah.
And in the calculus, for example, those are tiny little infinitesimal intervals. Okay, but they are not actually contained in the states themselves. They have a neighborhood, a little tangent space or what have you, where you can sort of draw little vectors that suggest that some kind of processing is going on. But the idea of being a state and being a process, those are two different things.
Yep.
In the ordinary way of looking at it, okay? It turns out that you can't properly describe reality and causation at all unless you put those things together somehow. And that's what it takes God to do. Okay? God provides the processing functionality for your state. You have an internal state, an external state. You're a material human being, right? Like to explain how that is changing through time, and maintaining its coherence through time, even as it changes, that's what you need God for.
How do I make sense of consciousness?
Well, ordinarily, quantum mechanics, you know what quantization is? Well, you decide what the ultimate irreducible objects are. Mm-hmm. Turns out that in order to quantize that theory that I was talking about, that theory of identity, where you've got the display and you've got the processor, and it's handling both. It turns out that in order to handle both of those things, you need a certain kind of quantum. That quantum is called an identity operator. God is the identity. So obviously these little quanta, they have to be, they're doing things, they're processing, so we can call them operators, right? They are identity operators. Okay, the identity operator has, basically it takes input from the outside world, recognizes it or accepts it using syntax, processes it, and then returns it to the world as external state. Okay, so things come in, then they're processed, right? There's throughput, which is, you could call that the subjective or internal state of the identity operator, and then it's returned to the external universe. So what I'm saying is that's consciousness. And I'm saying that consciousness exists in every part of the universe because those are the quanta.
That's what I'm asking. Are you telling me that this table is conscious?
In that sense, yes, generically conscious. But it's relying on our consciousness to do it. There's levels of quanta, okay? These are tertiary quanta. They're all put together using physical localistic forces, right? But those are underdeterminative. They don't fully determine what happens. Why? The Heisenberg uncertainty principle, for example, it tells you that, the quantum rules, they're probabilistic.
Right.
They don't actually determine events, okay? So what determines events? We do. We don't know how we do it, but we do it. When everybody's will is put together, we're all creating the best possible universe we can for ourselves. And God is what harmonizes all of our different perspectives and makes things happen for all of us at the same time. And if we were doing things correctly, this would be the best of all possible worlds. Sadly, however, we oftentimes make mistakes. And that's what we have to get out of doing, but we can't get out of doing it until we understand what reality is, what we are, and what the relationship between those two things is. Reality is actually generative, okay? It's not a fixed manifold. Everything is being created all the time. Not just our states. Our states are being recreated, right? I can cross my legs, I can uncross my leg. That's the changing state.
Yeah.
But the medium around us is changing. When I look at you, I'm seeing Michael Knowles, okay? I'm seeing you sitting there. But that means that I'm seeing your boundary. I'm seeing what distinguishes you from the external environment, right? There's a medium around you. So I have to be regenerating that at the same time as I'm regenerating your state in my head, okay? When I say regenerating, there's a reason I'm doing that. I could also say I'm recognizing Michael Knowles, I'm recognizing your state right now, but I'm also recognizing the state of the medium around you, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to distinguish you from the medium and you wouldn't exist at all. In the universe, everything changes with time. You're actually, in the theory of relativity, for example, all the points are events.
Yep.
Okay, and that means that there's a time parameter involved. Okay?
God is outside of time and space.
Well, God distributes over time and space, and there's some left over. Time and space is static. It's a display.
Yeah.
Imagine that you're a little homunculus inside a computer display, like the Matrix, for example, okay? God not only distributes over that, but there's a whole other domain where God exists. And that's the processing domain. That's the non-terminal domain in the CTMU. We're in the terminal domain, right? And most physicists, when they try to reason about the terminal domain, they reason under physical confinement. Okay, well, I can only look at physics, and I have to use what I know about physics, what I can observe about physics, to explain everything else that I explain. So they have that kind of explanatory closure going right there.
So speaking of this non-terminal domain, in a really basic question, I'm not going to ask you if I'm going to go to heaven or hell, but will I go to either heaven or hell?
You will persist after you die, okay? Where you go depends on who Michael Knowles really is. And you would know that better than anyone.
Yeah, I hope I know that better than. But you're telling me I'm going somewhere.
Yes.
You're confident of that. I don't just evaporate. I don't just turn into oblivion.
Well, you can. If you displease God, that's exactly what's going to happen to you. God is going to cut you off, and he's going to say, I can't see him anymore. He's going to turn away from you, and then you won't be able to reunite. Salvation will be impossible for you, because salvation means that God has got to pull you back into himself.
Right.
Okay, but God doesn't want to see you anymore. He doesn't even know you exist. He knows your physical body is there, but he's not interested anymore, because you hate him, you deny his existence, you offend him, so he's not going to look at you, right? So now what happens? Well, okay, you're dead. You still want to live. There's something in you that still desperately wants to live, so it's still going to be there. What happens now? Well, you try to create your own world for yourself, but if you're a bad person or you're an evil person, what kind of world is that going to be? It's going to be an evil world, and that's what we call hell.
This is what John Milton says in The Mouth of Satan. He says, the mind is its own place, and it can make a hell of heaven or heaven a hell.
Now you got it. Once again, what is reality? Is reality just stuff out there? No, reality has a mental aspect, right? And once you admit that basically everything has a mental aspect, then of course what's going on in your mind is real. It takes on a kind of reality. It's not the same as physical reality. It is nevertheless real.
Are angels and demons real?
Yes. Yes.
I think so too. Is there a fear that if you take some of these drugs, you might be letting in the wrong guys?
That's a problem, isn't it? And that's a problem that I think a lot of people have encountered. You have to be a certain kind of person to be able to handle these drugs and not be sucked under by them, okay? Because once your mind is messed with in that way, something else, it's weakened, you're not exactly in control anymore, something else can come in and grab it. And if you open up that gap that I was talking about, what can come into that gap might not be good for you.
God is real, angels are real, demons are real. Is the devil real?
Oh, yes. Yes, well, it has to be. We were talking about Michael Knowles being surrounded by the medium, and you've got a boundary. Well, God has a boundary too. He's got a very tight boundary. He is perfect. He can't take anything resembling imperfection, right? He can't take it into himself, because that would be a contradiction. Okay, so God needs an antithesis in order to be properly defined. What is that antithesis? Anti-God, or Satan. So it definitely exists. Now, Satan isn't coherent, because, he basically hates existence. Nevertheless, he gains coherence through human beings, through secondary tellers, as they're called in the CTMU. In other words, Satan can nucleate power structures, for example, things like corporations and governments, where you've got people in there that can be acquired as resources, and there's a kind of skeleton, a corporate organization, a governmental, organization that's holding them together, holding them in place, that can be exploited. Saying the devil lacks coherence. Coherence is what brings everything into superposition, right, with itself. In other words, it allows something to, this is going to sound a little bit paradoxical, allows something to communicate non-locally with itself, right? All of its possible states are in superposition. They exist all at once, okay? And this is pretty much inescapable.